Good morning. Today is Tuesday, lesson 12, and what we're going to do today is we're going to build a full stack application using Mongo Express, Node, and Angular. So I'm going to stream this. You're free to watch on your own time. The other thing I've actually done is posted on Blackboard I've actually posted the full lesson plan, so sort of my explanation and my own notes to myself, as well as all of the code for the completed application. It's a different application than the one we've been building, but similar code. I've posted all of that here in the lesson 12 folder for you as a Word document. So you can access anything here as a reference, although you've got the video and obviously the code will be on GitHub as usual. So what we want to do today, morning guys. I've also started a WebEx session, but if you've got questions, you can, of course, please post them in either the YouTube chat box, or you can jump into the WebEx meeting room and ask your questions there. So last week, what we did was we built a simple Angular app using the Angular command line interface, but it was kind of a standalone app. It wasn't connected at all to the rest of our Node code, the rest of the stack. So we looked at this slide last week and we talked about where Angular fit in. It was basically serving as a replacement for the HBS templating. So we would still have MongoDB on the back end, using Express and Node for our controllers, and then we're gonna put Angular in the front end. So we actually have to write a fair bit more code. So in our original, let's say our global food application, we had these 4 layers. We have MongoDB on the back end. We had a Node. We used Node to do our controller and our model. We used the Express generator to handle the server and the HTTP routing, and then our UI layer, we were using HBS. So in order to redo this as a single page, we're going to get rid of all the authentication. So we're just going to make this a public page where we want all of our CRUD to happen on one page, and that page should not need to reload at all. So we're still going to have our 3 backend layers. So in red here, those are going to be our server layers, the database, the model and controller, and then Express for routing the HTTP calls. But then our front end, where before we only had 1 layer, which was HBS, we're actually going to have 3 layers. So at the very front end, we're going to have an HTML page, which has Angular code inside it. And then we're going to have our Angular component. So we created one last week. We created a food component. So we're going to have to regenerate that component. And then lastly, we're going to have this Angular service layer. So this sits in between our Angular component and our server backend. So this is kind of the bridge between the UI front end layers and the server backend layers. So basically, we're going to be nesting the Angular application inside of our Node application. So we'll have a server side of it and a client side inside of the same application. So today's lesson, if we're going to get through, we'll see if we have a chance to get through all of create, read, update, and delete. Probably will be quite lengthy. We've got a fair bit of setup to do first. So we're going to wind up writing more code. Obviously, before we had 4 layers, and we're creating similar functionality, but now with 6 layers, it means we're going to have more code here, which is okay. But we're going to get, our ultimate front-end application is going to be really fast, and everything is going to happen in real time for the users without them having to navigate around or reload the page. So what we're going to do first, I'll just kind of drag this over and we can have a look at how we're going to set this up. And again, I've posted this document on Blackboard. It's in the lesson 12 folder. So this is kind of my lesson plan. This is what they look like. So here's what we're doing today. You know, we're looking at where does Angular fit in with the rest of our stack. We're going to work more with TypeScript, which we did last week. We're going to write a lot of TypeScript code today for our Angular front end. And we're going to integrate Angular into our existing global food application. So I'm going to leave the one we've been building alone. I'm going to make a new application and then bring in a lot of the server components into it. So I don't want to break and rip apart the one we have. We'll basically set it up from scratch, and we're going to bring in things like our models and controllers from our existing global food application. Then we're going to put that in a server folder. We'll then create a client folder, and in here, we'll scaffold out the Angular application, and then we can add our service layer, our component layer, and our UI layer inside. So this means we're actually going to have two applications running. Express will run on port 3000, and the Angular client will run inside of it on port 4200, like we did last week. So that's kind of the plan. So we're going to set up a new application from the beginning. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to my command prompt and open up my node folder. And I'm going to want to create a new project with the Express generator there first. And I will keep checking back in my Chrome StreamYard window just to see if there are questions. So I'm going to go into my node folder and just have a look in it with the dir command. So these are all my node applications. And here's our global food that we've been working with. So I'm going to make a new version of this. I think I'm going to call it Global Food SPA. SPA stands for Single Page Application. So I'm going to use the Express generator to make a new site here. Well, I've installed the Express generator globally, so I'm going to do Express, call it Global Food SPA. And I can use -H for HBS, doesn't really matter. We're not actually using any HTML templating engine on the front end because we're going to redo our front end with Angular. So I'm going to try to create my application, Express, give it a name, -H. And the generator creates it, and then it tells me when I'm done, change directories, go inside it, and run npm install. So I'm going to do that as well. Oh, it actually gave me Jade templates because I put -H instead of -HBS. Doesn't matter. We're not going to use those templates anyway. Nope. No. There's no assessment on this part. So no, you absolutely don't need to use Angular for assignment 2, Jill. This is this is nice to know. I'd like to be able to show you how to build an app with this, but there's no assessment on this part. So don't stress out if things aren't quite working or you fall a bit behind. So now I'm going to go into my new project and I will run npm I or npm install. This will download all the dependencies we need. So this just gives us a blank Express application. But what we're going to want to do, it's also prompted me saying there's a new version of npm available. And it's saying I should update my npm, which I will. npm I -g npm. So I'm actually updating npm. You don't have to do this. If you get prompted with this and you want to go ahead and update your npm, you can. I'm also getting some warnings that Jade is old. It's been renamed to Pug. It's telling me install the latest version of Pug. I'm ignoring that because, as I said, we're not going to use either of these anyway. We're going to use Angular for our front end. So I'm going to ignore these warnings. So I'll let this go for a minute. And when this is done, I'm going to open up my new project in WebStorm. I'll start the server running, and then we'll start to bring in some of the pieces from our old global food. We'll want our configuration folder. We'll want our models. We'll want our database connection in the app.js. Okay, so I'm going to open up. It's done now. So I'm going to open my new project in WebStorm. So here was my original global food. I want my global food single page application. And in my terminal, I should be able to use nodemon, kick it off, and this should just give us a plain old, boring Express generator app. So nothing fancy at all. You guys, I'm sure, are familiar with this by now. You know, there's just our plain standard Express generator application. So what I want to do is I want to start to reconfigure this, first of all, into a server end, and then into a client end. And then I want to copy in some of the server components that we have from our first global food application. Okay. And I know you guys have been following along. If you need any of that code, you can also always download my repository from GitHub. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new directory in here. So I'm going to make a new directory, which I am going to call server. So I want all our backend, our Node and Express code to go in here. So inside, first of all, then I'm going to take my roots folder. I'm going to rename it. First, I'm going to choose refactor and rename. I don't like this name roots. I want to rename it to controllers. This is optional, but I think it makes sense that it's called controllers. And then I want to move it inside of my server folder. And if I do this, it'll say, you know, do you want to search for references and change? Because app.js is pointing to this. So I'm going to say yes. So, okay. So now I've got server controllers. And if I open my app.js, it's now changed my path, which is good. I now want to copy a few things from our original global food app. So I'm going to go to my Windows directory. And I'm going to go to my original global food application. And I'm going to copy both. I'm going to copy, let's see, the config and the models. I'm going to copy both of those into, well, actually, so copy both of those. They're going to go in slightly different places. Sorry, we'll copy those. Actually, we'll put them both in this single page app. We're going to put these in our, I have to think about where I want my config. I'm going to paste them in here. But I think our config we want to put at the root. So instead of having config inside of server, I'm just going to move it up one level to the root. So I'll just drag it. So now server has controllers and models. And my config folder's here in the root. Now our model, if I open that up, now our model is using Mongoose, which we have not installed in this project. So I'm going to have to go back to my command prompt. I'll stop my server, and we're going to need to install Mongoose. So I'll stop my server from running. And I'm going to install the Mongoose package. Obviously, we're going to need this for our application to talk to MongoDB. So we'll install Mongoose. The next thing that we're going to need is we're going to need our database connection. So I've got my config file. My config file. My password back in. But our database is not connected. So the configuration is here, but I want to copy my database connection. So I think what I'll do, just jump back and open up my app.js here for a moment. So we'll need to require Mongoose, connect to the globals file, and set our database connection. So in my app.js, maybe underneath my routing, which we'll have to modify as well. I'll install Mongoose. And I'm just going to copy my database connection. Yeah, and then we'll copy our link to our global file as well as this code that connects to MongoDB. So it's lines from my app.js, lines 33 to 44, link to the configuration file and open a connection. So we'll use our global file that we added and the database connection string in there to connect. So I'm going to run my app again now. And it tells me it's connected to MongoDB. I shouldn't see any change in the browser. Still just a regular Express application. Okay, so I've sort of listed the steps. Again, these are on Blackboard for you to reference. So we've created the server folder, we've copied our model, we've copied our configuration to the root. Now we do need to build. We're going to have we had a foods controller before. I didn't copy that in. For that one, I'm actually going to make a new controller because we're no longer going to be rendering views directly in our Angular app. Our controller just becomes an API. So all our controller is going to do is send and receive JSON in all of the methods. So my next step is to make a new foods controller. So inside of server, I'm going to make a new JavaScript file called foods. We're going to set up our usual dependency on Express. Messing up my cases. We're going to create an Express router. Bottom here, we'll make this public, controller public, by exporting it. So right now it just looks like any other controller. So when we have a GET request at /foods, we're still going to have our usual request response callback. Oops. So when we get a request at the root at localhost /foods, all we want to do is query the database for the list of food and send it back as JSON. If we look at our original controller, I'll open up the controller we had in our global food app so we can have a look to compare it. So we are going to need Mongoose. We're not going to need Passport. And we won't need the authentication check. So here was our main page. So when we had a GET request in the root, we called food.find, and we either handled an error or we rendered the food index view and passed it. So our code is going to be similar, but instead of rendering a view, we're simply going to pass back the foods as JSON. So we're converting this method into an API method. So in this case, what does it look like? So we are going to need Mongoose. We can query the database. And we need our food model that we copied in. So we need this model if we're going to be able to query the database and the food collection. So put in a comment here. We're going to get list of all foods and return a JSON response. We'll call food.find, and we're either going to get back an error or we'll get back a list of food. If we have an error, we can maybe log the error. And we can return JSON response where we include the error and we'll send a status. Let's see, which HTTP status do we want? Here's our list of HTTP status codes. So the user's trying to run a query and get a list. If this fails, let's see. We could use bad request. Let's see which of these. And we could send a 404. Maybe we'll send a 400 error. Otherwise, we'll return the foods, and we'll return a status, think of 200. Again, we can check 200 is okay. We'll look at the status codes. There might be another code that's a bit more appropriate for a query result, but it's probably 200. Yeah, probably just 200. So we're basically making an API. So we're not interacting with the front end at all. We're not loading anything in the browser. We're simply returning JSON. Now, in order for this to work, let's try this out. So I'll save this change. And if I go back to the browser and try to go to localhost 3000/foods, we want it to try and call that API method. So if this works properly, it's going to give us a list of food in JSON format. Now we got a not found because we haven't set up routing for this path. We did it in our original app.js. We connected to the food controller, and we also set up the routing here, that any URLs that started with /foods would be handled by that controller. So we need these same 2 lines of code here in our single page app. So go back to my app.js. Up here, they're already linking to the index and users controllers. I'm going to create a foods controller. I'm adding a reference to the foods controller. And then down here, I want to add a mapping should make our 404 error go away. So now our API should be functional. So any URLs that start with /foods get handled by the foods controller, and the foods controller has get method that will find all the foods and return them as a JSON object. So I'll pull this back up in the browser. I'll try to shrink it down so you can see the code. So I've added line 9 and line 25. And now our controller is working. Our API method uses our model, which uses Mongoose, which talks to our MongoDB, and it can retrieve the food and send it back as JSON. We could use Postman and make a GET request to this URL, and it's going to return the same data to us. So the backend piece of this is basically set up now, at least to retrieve. Yes, we'll still need to write a post method to add a new food. We may or may not get to edit and delete today. I may just film those as separate videos later, but at least we want to be able to read and add data through our mean stack application today. So this is most of what we had to do on the back end. Although we will need to write a post method, as I've said. So I'm going to leave this running. I'm going to now go to I'm going to use my original command window. So I want to leave my Node server running because I'm going to ultimately need two windows. I need this window to run the Express server. I'm going to need a separate window to install and then run the Angular server because the two servers are going to be running at the same time. Express on port 3000 and Angular on port 4200. So I've got my server folder set up, and I'm going to use the Angular command line tool to generate the client folder and install Angular inside it. So in my second command window, I'm in my root folder, my global food SPA, and I'm going to run the command ng new client. So this is going to build a client folder inside of my project folder. And inside of the client folder, it's going to create a scaffolded Angular app, the same one that we generated last week with the Angular CLI. So I'm going to run ng space new space client in my project root. This will take a minute to run. So I want to end Angular routing. Not sure if we need this. I'll say yes. And I'm going to hit enter for CSS. So it's going to create the client folder. It's going to install the Angular app inside. I'll just let that run for a minute. So now I've got my client folder. And once this is done, in this separate command window, I'm going to start the Angular server. So then we can actually load the Express backend in one tab and the Angular frontend in a separate tab because they're running on two separate servers. So we can see here's our source and here's the actual application directory with our template homepage and style sheet. So we'll let it finish installing its dependencies, and then we'll use the ng-serve -- open command to start the server and open the Angular app in a new browser tab. We're going to get a whole bunch of all the template HTML, most of which we took out last week. We're going to take all of that stuff out, add Bootstrap, and then start to build the Angular UI. Okay, so once this is done, I'm going to run the command cd client. I need to go inside of my new client directory. And I can start my Angular server with ng-serve -- open. So this will compile the Angular front end and start the server watching for changes. So again, that command is ng-serve -- open. So it's going to compile things. It's going to take a little bit. So it opens my browser and it loads the default Angular homepage, this index.html file. My Express app is still running, so now I've got both servers running. So I'm going to leave this command window open and also leave my WebStorm terminal open with my Express app running here. So applications running, one inside of the other, but they're not really talking to each other yet. So first thing I'm actually going to do is make a few changes. I'm going to go to my index.html inside of here. Okay, we're going to change the title. So we'll call this COMP2106 Global Food SPA, our single page application. And let's say we want to add Bootstrap to this. So what I'll do, I've got this source assets folder. So we've got styles.css right in the root. I'm going to make a new folder here inside of assets, say a new directory, which I will call CSS. And I want to copy the minified Bootstrap from my original global food in here. And then I'm going to add a link to it in the index.html. So I'll go to my global food, and in here it was in public and style sheets. Here was our minified Bootstrap. So I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to put it inside of my client, source, assets, and CSS. So you can see the path here. So inside client, source, assets, CSS. I'm going to add that. So this will be in source. Assets, CSS. So my page will use Bootstrap now. Don't think we'll see any change yet, but that's okay. So our index.html right now is using this app root component. So this is kind of the default component we get. Comes by default. It has a title of client, and it uses this HTML template page. So we could use this, but like we did last week, I want to make my own component. We want to make a food component and put all our application UI and code in there. And then we'll replace app root with app food. So our component will get loaded into the home page. So I'm going to need to stop my Angular service for a second, my Angular server. Hit Control-C. And then in the client, what I want to do, actually inside the client and inside of the app folder, I want my component built in here, not in the root of client, but in the app folder. So I'm going to change directories and go to src/app. So in here, so cd space src/app, inside the app folder, I want to generate my new Angular component with this code ng generate component, and I'll call it food. We did this last week. We'll do it again. So I'm going to use Angular to generate this food component. So it now creates a food subfolder. I have a food component, a TypeScript file with this selector of app/food. So now in my index.html, I want to replace the template component that Angular generates with our food component. So when the page loads, I don't want to see all this. We want to see this page that says food works. So I'll go back to my server and start it again with ng serve. I don't need the -- open. I already have a browser tab open for my Angular app. So I'll wait till the server recompiles and starts running again. I think we'll need to make one more thing happen before our food component will show up, but we'll give it a try. Now we don't get anything here. Notice it doesn't load the home page, but we need to make one more change in order to get our food works message to show up. We'll do that, and then I'm going to take a break. So I'm going to open up this file under app. Here's our app module.typescript. So we've got our food component included, but notice the bootstrap, the startup component, is our app component. So I want to change this so the bootstrap or the startup component is now our food component instead. So now, without even a refresh, Angular automatically sees that change, and now my food component is showing up. Let's just check our style sheet. Okay, my link to my CSS isn't quite right. When I click it, it's not giving me the right CSS file. Let's see, what did we do wrong here? So there's our CSS, but my link isn't quite right in index.html. We'll try a leading slash. No, my CSS still isn't there, so bear with me for a second. Let's see, index is here. Oh, I think we're already inside. Question of getting the path right. There. So if we just start the path with assets, because it's actually on the same level, then our CSS shows up. So now I've got bootstrap. So for example, if I want to change my page title in my food component.html, instead of this being food works, this is the title we had on our original application. We'll put in an H1 of COMP2106 Global Food Market. And there we go. Our title shows up here. Okay, no problem, Blair. That's fine. I'll record it and feel free to work through it on your own time. As I said, all of the code I've posted in the lesson 12 folder. Okay, so it's in a Word document, so you can follow along and check it with the video as well. Okay, I'm going to take a pause here, and I'll come back in about 10 minutes. I will also push what I've done so far to Git.